you see 90+% inflation in what should be one of the richest countries in the hemisphere, with the oil reserves that they have, that shows you that, I mean, obviously there's corruption at a colossal scale, but that also shows you the failure of the socialistic policy, literally blowing the hell out of the the drug speedway. Right, we see this with the Belt and Road Initiative going across Eurasia, and also clearly going across Africa. Now, at this point, China has access and ownership over deep water ports that are in the Atlantic.
Ramping up the pressure on Venezuela as it looks towards a post-Maduro future, with a new phase of the operations eyeing options to overthrow him. The Trump administration reportedly considering dropping leaflets to pressure the dictator on his birthday, which is today, and to get him to flee the country on his own. Alex Gray served as chief of staff to the National Security Council during President Trump's first term, and he joins us now. Alex, welcome. So we know there's a new phase. We also heard yesterday they said everything is on the table, or no options are off the table. So what do you think is going to happen next? How will this unfold?
Well, thanks for having me, Rachel. I think the president is doing everything he can through his mantra of peace through strength to use American military power and covert means to compel Maduro to make the right choice, which is to leave Venezuela, to give the Venezuelan people an opportunity to have a new future. Remember, 25 years of the Chavez-Maduro dictatorship, and the Venezuelan people have gone from being the wealthiest in the hemisphere to the poorest because of the Marxist-Leninist ideology of that regime. And also, Rachel, this is
let me jump in, and he's exactly right. In fact, there is 94% inflation going on presently right now in Venezuela. So when we look at, obviously, he's a dictator and a despot, but when we look at the similarities in these socialist policies that have taken over so many of Central American countries, and then we see, including Cuba, right, of course, with the Castro regime, but when you look at that, in comparison to what Mondami's trying to propose in New York City, you see that this is exactly why we had that bill pass in the House this week, where the Republicans, under Mike Johnson's leadership, had a pledge, basically, against socialistic policies. And this is why. Clearly, Maduro's taken it to another level. But when you see 90+% inflation in what should be one of the richest countries in the hemisphere, with the oil reserves that they have, that shows you that, I mean, obviously there's corruption at a colossal scale, but that also shows you the failure of these socialistic policies.
Incredibly important. They are directly killing Americans every single day because the Venezuelan regime and the narco-traffickers are essentially one and the same. And unlike the presidents of both parties since the end of the Cold War, President Trump is actually focused on what's happening in our hemisphere that's affecting our homeland. Instead of pushing these democracy promotion wars in the Middle East, he is focused on our hemisphere, which is so long overdue.
Exactly right. And this has been nothing new, right? When you look at the American presidents of the past, you need to have a firm grip. I mean, clearly on the Panama Canal, well, that's obvious, but a firm grip as best you can on the government structures of South and Central America. And to this point, to the point where you just can't have large foreign powers have direct control over the currency, trade, and strategic reserves and strategic geography of these countries. And what Trump is doing with his narco-trafficking, we've seen him literally blowing the hell out of the drug speedboats. I mean, I'm not making the case that Venezuela is where the majority of the drugs are coming from. We clearly know that China's sending API, the active product ingredient for fentanyl, straight to the cartels in Mexico. So we know that the majority of the issue is coming from the Mexican border, but you can't deny that there's a significant percentage of drug trafficking coming out of Venezuela. You just can't. You can't deny that Maduro's behind it with his cartel structure as well. I mean, just the fact alone that we have 100,000 plus Americans dying every year just to fentanyl overdoses. That alone should tell you where Trump's focus is. And it's on making sure that our hemisphere is controlled, is orderly, and that China and Russia don't get their claws in, if you will, into some of these despots.
That's a very interesting point. I think historically speaking, we've never seen anything like this. I think, and I think since the end of the Cold War,
Exactly.
Nobody is focused on Latin America. It's been under a lot of neglect, and yet, as you say, it affects us deeply. The president talks a lot about the drugs coming in. I think he's right. The cartels, which, as you know, are definitely a menace, not just in the hemisphere. They end up affecting America as well. But how much of this
Correct.
also has to do, honestly speaking, with China?
Rachel, I think you cannot understate how significant this is in terms of our larger competition with China. In the absence of America, again, as presidents of both parties were focused on these endless wars overseas, China and Russia were expanding their foothold in our hemisphere. And Venezuela was a major point for Russian and Chinese infiltration of the hemisphere. And President Trump, I think, is looking at this and saying, we cannot allow our greatest geopolitical rival in Beijing to have a presence in our neighborhood the way China has for the last 20 years.
He's exactly right. We see this with the Belt and Road Initiative going across Eurasia and also clearly going across Africa. Now at this point, China has access and ownership over deep water ports that are in the Atlantic. So now I'm not making the case that China has a navy that can be world dominating, but clearly our navy is rusty. Our fleet is rusty, rather, not our Navy personnel. But as far as technologies and access, when you see what China under Xi's leadership is doing, they're basically making the same maneuverability that the U.S. did for decades with the IMF, that they're trying to get financial structures in place, trade agreements in place, and then ownership structures in place when the financing and debt comes due. That's exactly how China got access to the deep water port in the Atlantic in Africa, in one of the African nations on the Africa's west coast. So again, it's just about debt structure. It's about financing. That's exactly what the World Bank has done. But I want to get back to something that came up earlier in this conversation. The buildup that we see right now with Trump is not just for show. This is clearly maximum pressure short of a kinetic war in Venezuela. And there is zero doubt that we have special forces that are active, that we have CIA agents and personnel that are active in basically trying to overthrow the Maduro regime. There's no doubt that that shouldn't even be a secret. That's part of the playbook 101. But what you're also seeing is now a buildup with the naval fleet. They just brought in the Gerald Ford, which is the largest aircraft carrier in the U.S. Navy fleet. They brought it from the Mediterranean, took 15 days, and made it over to just off of, well, kind of in the Caribbean. It's not just off the Venezuela coast, but close enough. It will take minutes for any of those assets to penetrate Venezuelan airspace. So at this point, what Maduro's doing is he's in a position where he just can't win. Trump is onto him. He knows what he's up to. He's had enough of it. Trump can just justify this buildup just with the narco-trafficking alone, even though there is truly more to it. So what you're seeing here is really a hemispheric doorstep play where Trump is trying to protect our hemisphere and doing this specifically to make sure that Xi and China don't get their hooks further into Maduro. I mean, just last year it came out that under these massive oil reserves that are in Venezuela, 90% of these reserves are now being pledged vis-a-vis Maduro to China and Xi. Clearly, we know that China can get oil from Russia and other Eastern European countries, and they probably are. But the strategic nature of disrupting that oil supply or the strategic play of disrupting the oil supply to that degree is critical. Trump's no dummy. This is a multi-pronged, multifaceted approach, and I think he's exactly right in trying to get Maduro to go and leave and obviously get a more aligned, democratically aligned predecessor to Maduro in play.
This is a major, major effort. And while we've allowed the Venezuelan regime to contribute throwing tons of drugs into the United States, we've also allowed China to gain a foothold in the energy reserves in Venezuela, which is obviously totally against our interests. So the president is taking, I think, a really strategic focus here.
Correct.
Yeah. We've been on the couch talking about how does he exit? You know, what does that look like? I'm also looking at what's happening between Ukraine and Russia. Russia also an ally of Maduro and his dictatorship. Wondering, in my mind, how much of that negotiation will secretly involve helping to find a place for Maduro to go to. Would you tell us what you think that looks like? Where does he go? I know he must be worried about the cartels killing him. Absolutely, he's the head of this operation. So what does it look like for him? How does he leave without getting killed by the cartels? And who would take him?
Well, something tells me he's probably going to end up in Havana with his benefactors in the Cuban regime. And it also wouldn't surprise me if somehow he ended up sharing an apartment with Bashar Assad from Syria in Moscow. And look, these dictators, they have a club. They look out for each other. I think the most important thing right now is to find an exit path where we can get Maduro out of Caracas and we can get the Chinese, as you said, Rachel, we can get them out of Caracas and we can focus on getting Americans safe from the importation of dangerous drugs that Venezuela is so actively helping to promote.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Maduro's making his way. I don't think he's going to be going to Cuba because I think that's going to be probably under the microscope of Trump here shortly, just with what China has done too in getting access to their ports. And that, keep in mind that Havana is just 90 miles from Key West. So Cuba, I don't think Maduro's going there. Maduro's going to Moscow. That's exactly it. And I think at the end of the day, they're right, that they need to have a pathway to get him there. Maduro's not going to go quietly, but he will go quickly. And once that pathway is built, I think you're going to see this come to a quick end. So I'm curious, do you agree with President Trump's activities going just short of a kinetic war and administering maximum pressure to the Maduro cartel and the Maduro regime? Do you agree with this? Do you agree that Trump is right in protecting our hemispheric neighbors and aligning them with a more democratic government structure? I mean, we can all agree on the fact that Maduro is just a despot dictator and is a pretty good example of failed socialist policies. That's how he got his hooks in, and then the dictator started to take over. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like material like this, please do subscribe to America First Alerts. We would love to have you come along for the ride.